All right. We're back again. Mike, how's it going?
It's going well. It feels like we just did this.
Well, I guess it was only a week, so.
No, it's a Groundhog's Day joke.
I see. I see. This has been too long a week for that sort of witty humor.
That one is a little esoteric. You have to have watched the 1990 something movie starring Bill Murray, Groundhog's Day.
I have watched the movie. It was released before I was born, but I have watched it. So I will say that we didn't have like cable or any sort of TV growing up. We had a TV, it just didn't have any live television. Um, and so all I watched growing up was like DVDs or VHS mostly, I guess, of whatever my parents watched when they were growing up. So like the Andy Griffith Show, um, Hogan's Heroes,
Ooh,
like
yeah.
just all the stuff that's on like TV Land now. Uh, that's like the
Yep.
only shows I'm familiar with. So I
Yeah.
do all that to say that I do get references that were before my time a lot of times.
When I was little, and I guess not so little, when I was going through school, we had cable and Nickelodeon was like new, but they
Mm,
had Nick at Night at like, I don't know what time, 10 o'clock
yeah.
or something. And like, I like staying up late. Like 4 a.m. seems like a good bedtime for me. And
Yeah.
because I'm an adult, I tend to go to bed earlier than that. But I remember I used to do my homework in front of the TV starting at like 11 p.m. and all of those reruns would be, the Munsters and Car 54, Where Are You, and Hogan's Heroes and all that stuff. So like I've like passively watched an amazing amount of those old
Yeah.
shows, and yeah, they're fun. Hokey. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. It looks like our esteemed guest has arrived, so I'm going to bring him up here, and uh, I'll uh, I'll let you introduce yourself, Sam.
Yeah, sorry I'm late. I had to grab some kombucha, make sure my vocal cords were lubricated properly.
Sam is our
Um,
resident drink expert on the team.
well, Mike's pretty good with a cocktail shaker himself. But what I actually do here is I lead the firmware team here at Goliath, and we don't make products, but we do release an SDK that all of our customers use to connect to our cloud backend, which is a real product that we sell.
And y'all had a big release this week that was making the rounds and all of the important places. It was the v0.10 was the version, right, that went out yesterday.
Yeah, so v0.10 of our firmware SDK, which is a pretty big milestone for us. So um, I guess a little bit of a history lesson. When Goliath started, which was before I started at Goliath, but when Goliath started, it started as um, a cloud platform specifically for Zephyr devices. And so our first SDK was built on top of the Zephyr operating system, and it was very tightly integrated into that system. And we love Zephyr, we still love Zephyr, but not all of our clients wanted to use it. So we built another SDK for ESP-IDF, and then expanded that one to work on a couple of other systems. And then we decided that maintaining two SDKs was not a very good use of our limited resources. So we decided to combine them into one. We chose to combine it into firmware SDK instead of expanding the Zephyr SDK to other ones, just because, like I mentioned, the Zephyr SDK was pretty tightly coupled into Zephyr. And so yeah, that's been what I've been working on the entire time that I've been at Goliath, and Mike and my team, the rest of our firmware team, have been working on it even longer. And Wednesday, we no, yesterday. Yesterday we released it. Wednesday we did the work. Yesterday we released it. Uh, we released version 0.10 of our SDK, which includes full support for Zephyr in our cross-platform SDK. So now all of our platforms have our highest level support in one code base, one SDK.
Awesome. Awesome. And I know, leading up to this, there was like the integration of Zephyr, right? But it wasn't as you were saying, like we weren't just copying over the Zephyr SDK into the cross-platform SDK. It was somewhat of like a rethinking of the APIs. There's some cleanup that was done. It's really like, I like to think of it as like some third new thing, I guess, not the merging of the two SDKs necessarily. What were some of the things besides just bringing in that Zephyr support that, were things that y'all tackled and delivered with the release?
Right. So the two SDKs had very different APIs, which, as often happens at small companies, is mostly just because they're written by two different people. So we went through that. We took the pieces that we liked from both of them and combined them. So, for example, the Zephyr SDK uses types in a way that is more familiar to people who come from a Linux or a Zephyr background, which is that not using a lot of type defs. And on the other hand, the firmware SDK has more, I don't know what the right way of saying it, but it has a richer API, I guess, as far as like for interacting with different data types like strings, integers, floats, stuff like that. And so, we liked the one piece in Zephyr, we liked the one piece in the firmware SDK, and we pulled those together. So that's one big thing that we've updated. Another big one, which isn't user facing per se, but will result in a much better experience for the user, is we've greatly expanded our testing. So one of the big problems with any project, but especially something that you're trying to run cross-platform, is making sure that it works. Our SDK is designed to run on 4 different code ecosystems, I guess you could say, right now, and we test that against maybe close to a dozen boards, maybe let's say 10 boards. I don't have all of those running on my computer every time I make a change. So ensuring that, fixing something or adding a feature in Zephyr, it doesn't break support in EXPDF and vice versa, it was really important to us. And that's something that gets harder with a cross-platform SDK. So we invested a lot into our automated testing infrastructure.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
I just also wanted to say we had some really good input during the beta testing phase from people. I noticed that Luis Ubeda is watching the live stream right now and commented, and he sent us a lot of good feedback. We got good feedback from Jared Wolf. We got good feedback from Timon and a few other people. And we made changes, and luckily Sam was on the ball. Sam's like, we should get back to those people and tell them all the things we did. So we just did that this week, but that felt really good. The other thing, so Sam, I'm not sure you're watching last week, but Dan did a demo of CDG, which shows how we're engineering our product to plan for the future, that we, whatever the future may bring, we're going to be ready for that. I feel like a lot of the API decisions that were made for this release are also kind of planning for that future on the device, especially doing things to avoid breaking changes. I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There are some things obviously that we know are coming that we're probably not ready to share publicly. But we did make a lot of breaking changes to the API in the SDK in this release. And since we were going to make some breaking changes, our goal was to make as many breaking changes as we could in one release. We went with a rip the Band-Aid off approach instead of death by 1,000 cuts. So it was kind of an opportunity. It's kind of freeing, actually, because I don't know. I think when I joined, there were maybe some very minor things that weren't really problems that were maybe a little bit annoying to me. But because we were making a bunch of other changes that we needed to make, we could make the small ones too, instead of wrap that up into one. So as was mentioned, our version number is 0.10, which means it's not. We are not advertising it as a stable API, but our intent is to keep it much more stable going forward. And that intent to keep it stable, like Mike mentioned, is part of the reason why we made some API changes in this release in preparation for some features that we'll have coming later this year.
Awesome. What we did also get a question before we even got started here, which is a first here on the Friday afternoon stream. So that's exciting. But I know Marcin did a lot of work on migrating from, I guess, I believe that, Zephyr support was added with integrating with libcoap, which is what we use across other platforms. And then there was a switch over recently, in fact, a couple of days ago, to Zephyr's CoApp library. Can you kind of like talk a little bit about that, and maybe not just the technical aspects that were advantageous there, but also the process that the firmware team went through to kind of like analyze and make the decision to invest in that work at this point in time?
Yeah, so I'd say that there's probably like 3 layers to this, and one is like just like philosophically, our goal is for our SDK to run on every platform, but and there are certain decisions that we have to make in our code in order to do that, right? Like, so for example, internally we wrap a lot of OS calls so that whether we're calling it to FreeRTOS or Zephyr or something like ThreadX or NetX in the future, that's, we can do that. But that's not a decision that we want to force onto our customers, right? Our customers, whether you're using Zephyr or ESPDF, it should feel like you're using something designed specifically for that platform. Basically, it's very important to us that the cross-platform nature of our SDK doesn't require any compromises on the part of our customers. So Zephyr has a co-op library. If you're developing a Zephyr application, I'm not saying you never would, but it certainly would be a big decision for you to decide to integrate an entirely new co-op stack when one already exists and is native to your system. So philosophically, we want it to feel like a native app. You should be using the native tools. That's our philosophy. Analytically, right, the process we went through. So we started with libcoap because that was what we were using. Libcoap does have a pretty easy integration layer. We did have to integrate it ourselves. So it has native integrations with lightweight IP and embed TLS and things like that. So we had to write our own integration layer in order to use it with Zephyr's socket infrastructure. But it's pretty well-defined interface, and so while that was certainly some work, it wasn't too difficult. And yeah, so then we analyzed that. There are some things that both from a performance perspective and from a feature perspective were not as great when using libcoap compared to the Zephyr co-op stack. So there are certain features of like using Zephyr's co-op stack, the way it integrates more tightly into its sockets API that not necessarily things we couldn't have done, but we would be reproducing a lot of work that has already been done in Zephyr in order to get that tight integration. So one example there is like offloaded DTLS sockets, which is, by the way, a new feature for our full support release as compared to our beta release. But another one, and the big one, and this is really the primary motivator, is the RAM and the ROM usage. So we did some analysis. My team did some good analysis, and I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. I probably should have brought them, anticipating this question. But it was something like an extra 60 kilobytes of flash and 20 or 30 kilobytes of RAM that libcoap takes compared to the Zephyr co-op stack. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to disparage anything or make any assumptions about libcoap's development philosophy, but we just found that the Zephyr co-op stack is just as performant as libcoap, but significantly more efficient in terms of resource usage.
Awesome. I was just I think we've talked about before on here the our design doc process. And so I was just jumping over there to Marcin's design doc, and we probably won't share that here. But I did have the numbers handy that we could potentially show. Mike, from your perspective, being part of this kind of like migration from libcoap to Zephyr, I feel like you sit in this really unique and important place in like tying together our engineering to our users, and that you do engineering, right? You write firmware, and then you're also kind of like the heaviest consumer of it because you consume it before it's even merged, right? I'm curious from your perspective. Y'all talked about like the breaking changes. You talked about changing the co-op library. From your perspective of maybe like being on the consumer side of that, what's been your experience like updating? I believe there's work on some migration support and that sort of thing. What's been your experience in that area?
Yeah, so it's not bad. One of the things I did as part of this effort was write the migration guide. So if you have code that's already on our Golioth Zephyr SDK and you want to move over to the Firmware SDK, you can use that migration guide. But it's also kind of like a good cheat sheet on what changed. Most stuff is pretty straightforward in just like taking out one call and putting in a call of a different syntax. So like a lot of it is syntax stuff. But then a lot of it just like got a lot easier to like be intuitive about. Like for instance, the naming of all our APIs now follows like a similar format. So if you're looking for something, you can kind of guess like what the API starts with and then follow it along. And it wasn't that it wasn't like that before, but there was kind of like because different services were built at different times, we hadn't kind of like settled on one way of doing everything. And so I think that's a lot more uniformed and kind of nice. And then the ability to control things a little bit more, like to be able to pass a configuration struct into an initialization function is kind of nice in that you can just use the one that's provided by our samples library, or if you need something custom, like it's right there and ready to use. The other thing I really liked so far is that a lot of the stuff that was in user space for the firmware update is included under the SDK hood for this. I mean, you could still kind of get at all the stuff custom that you might want to do, but if you're just like, I need an out of the box OTA experience, like this truly is like 2 function calls to get that OTA set up, and that feels pretty good.
Awesome. What were some of the small things, Sam, that you mentioned earlier, like the things that you wanted to update that you kind of got to do right as part of these changes? I'm always curious about like from a firmware perspective, what are the things that y'all run into? You're like, oh, this is like kind of painful to work with. Like you said, it doesn't really eliminate any functionality, but it's just maybe something that's kind of like a nitpick, maybe that's maybe your preferred coding style or something like that.
Yes, there certainly were, and I do want to caveat because this is a public forum. I'm not trying to like publicly shame anybody who worked on this before I did. But there is a certain like I would say prevailing coding style among most firmware engineers and embedded code that kind of harks back to a day of like custom compilers and everything needing to be like really tied very specifically to different microarchitectures you might be working on. And so what that means basically is using a lot of custom types and avoiding a lot of standard features of the C library because you might be stuck on some super old 8086 compiler that hasn't been updated in 25 years, right? I think that it's not, those people generally aren't the people that we are targeting, people who are stuck on a 25-year-old compiler. Although if you are and you want to connect a device from 1999 to the internet, please reach out. Yeah, so one big nitpick that I have is type defs. I think that they get overused a lot in C. I think there are places where they're useful, but I think a lot of people use them to avoid like 4 or 5 keystrokes when they're writing code. So the reason why I personally like them is I feel like they hide information from the developer and often information that you're still expected to know. So if you have a custom type, a type def of a struct, for example, you might not know that that's a struct. It could be quite large. You might put that onto the stack, for example, and that could be a big mistake. so it makes that like a little bit difficult, but at the same time, oftentimes you'll be required to access members of that struct, which means you need to know it's a struct. And so if you need to know it's a struct anyway, then my personal philosophy is you should just use the struct tag and not type stuff it. So again, that's it's a nitpick that all that code still works. It's like there was no functionality there. Functionally, when it compiles down to assembly, the assembly is exactly the same.
Right.
So it is just sort of a coding thing. So that's one of it. There are other things like changing like our include paths to have a little bit more hierarchy to the folders. So that just looks a little bit nicer, I think, when you're like including it in source, instead of it being like a single file name, it's, you know, now it's like Golioth / something. So it just feels a little more organized. With some of the other ones. And then there's some other work that we did around modularizing the internal architecture. So there were some circular references where generally the way our SDK is built is that we have our co-op client, which sort of manages all of the internet operations that are going on, and, you know, generally your gets, your puts, your posts, etc. That sits on top of whatever co-op stack we're using, so libco-op or separate co-op, and then we have our services built on top of that. So that would be, you know, setting service RPC, OTA, all of that, right? We had a few circular references where our middle co-op stack was aware of our RPC service and our setting service, and so that made it difficult to not include those services. For example, if you didn't have RPC running, there was, because it was included at this very core layer, it became difficult to just like k-config that out. So we made some structural changes there. Again, mostly just organizational, that did change our assembly a little bit, so a little bit more than the type def change. But just sort of organizing it, so it's a little bit more modular now to sort of add or remove different services according to what your application might need.
Gotcha. The kind of like model for execution, right, with the co-op client, is you like start the co-op client, and then we have or I haven't looked at the most recent since the final touch on the release, but we kind of have like synchronous and asynchronous versions of different operations that we perform. Do you want to, either one of you, talk a little bit about what that execution model looks like, and, you know, if you for example, maybe like what it looks like, what's happening behind the scenes when you perform an asynchronous versus synchronous operation from any of our services?
Yeah, so under the hood, actually, I would say everything is asynchronous, which means that when you, let's say, do a post operation, you're sending some like DB stream data, some time series data. You can just pass like a callback, right, which will alert you once that operation has done. Basically, once that data has like left the device, gone through the co-op stack, not necessarily all the way. Yeah, because I don't believe we're using from mistress. It's not necessarily waiting for the act from the cloud, but once it's gone into the stack. And then for our synchronous operations, you know, if you're writing your code and you want your code to block while that's happening, we just basically insert our own callback there within the SDK that waits on or will post to a semaphore that your synchronous call is waiting for. So the synchronous operations are actually something that we sort of built on top of the naturally asynchronous operations of the lower level co-op stacks.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Was there any other kind of like changes or anything like that unrelated to the co-op library that improved any of the performance in the firmware SDK this release, or was it mostly just like you know, cosmetic cleanup kind of stuff?
I'm trying to think. So I'm not sure if we had anything too much for performance. We did find a few functionality improvements, I would say.
Yeah.
So actually, Mike found a great one during our release testing, actually, around registering multiple settings. So basically, when we start our setting service, we set up an observation on the whole settings object, and when you So that will send us the settings object when we set up the observation, and then when we receive the object, we update any settings that are registered with our SDK. It's a callback system. If sometime after that initialization you register a new setting, that doesn't trigger an update of that setting. So that setting will stay basically out of sync and not updated until the next time it changes. So now we make sure that we update that setting immediately. Yeah, I guess, I don't know. Basically, it's not really a performance improvement other than it does perform what it should right now.
Right.
It didn't necessarily do that before. I would say it is a little bit of a corner case. Generally, you're updating all those at initialization at the beginning of your application anyway. So it's not something that our customers reported to us, which is good. It's always good when we find bugs before our customers do.
And I think not necessarily performance, but Sam already touched on the modularity of the services, like even more than the Zephyr SDK and definitely more than previous versions of this SDK, like every service can be turned on or off. So it's not built in. So you're conserving your ROM there. You know, if no matter what you're using, you can just piecemeal pick it out one at a time, which I was looking for. So I'm glad to see that come in.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about moving forward? You'll have, like a more modular architecture, which allows you to maybe move a little faster. You have a much more robust testing infrastructure, which allows you to have more confidence with changes you're making. What kind of changes or new functionality that you're able to talk about are kind of like top of mind moving forward?
Yeah. So performance is something that we do want to look at. So for example, the setting thing I just mentioned, that absolutely works. It's not necessarily the most efficient. That means we're making a get call every time for the whole settings object, every time we register a setting. That's something that we could cache on the device, and maybe we can only fetch the specific setting. So it's just like one example there. There are, all right, so there's some improvements that we're looking at as far as larger pieces of data, how we move those in and out of the device to make that a little bit more efficient. And then we are looking towards improvements for our OTA system. So we've done some experiments in the past around compression, around delta updates. None of that is shipped. That's not a feature. Sorry. But and I'm not sure that that's necessarily the direction that we will go in the future, but we do know that there are improvements that we can make there for, especially around more complicated update scenarios where you might have like more than one MCU on the device, you might need to update a modem, or you might have some other piece of code or assets or something that you need to download as part of your firmware image.
How about you, Mike? Is there anything top of mind for you?
It's so fresh. I mean, we just cut the release like less than 48 hours ago. So like right now,
Yeah,
I'm going around trying to crush all the demons in the documents that didn't get updated at the time of release. So still some like previous version numbers out there. And I was just updating our OTA tests. Our automated testing for OTA didn't update to the new version yet. So I want to make sure that those get updated to the new version so we don't have to continue manually testing that stuff. As far as user-facing things, I'm excited about what Sam tap danced around, which is moving large blocks of data to and from the device. I think there are some interesting ways to abuse Golioth with that. And so I'm sure we'll talk about that on future versions.
Yeah, and Dan and I talked earlier today about another change that might give us a little bit more data efficiency in moving small pieces of data even in and off the device. So again, without going into too much detail, that's something that I'm personally very excited for. Another thing, I guess, more on like the process and internal side of things. Mm-hmm. Our release process this week, it went much smoother than our previous one, but not as smooth as I would like. So another place that I'd like to spend some focus on is improving our process and automation around releases, so that we can release faster. So it's kind of more of a, I guess not a performance of our code, but a performance of our release process. That I think that's probably, releasing firmware is always hard. releasing firmware that runs on, a infinite number of hardware combinations across 4 different operating systems is even harder. So it's something that we'll be looking to improve continually, I expect.
This was like, what would you say, like 3 times faster than the last release we did? Like once we were like, okay, let's test and get the release out the door, it was quite a bit more smooth this time.
Yes.
Even though the changes were, the number of large changes was infinitely more, but just because we have kind of pulled everything together, especially with automated testing, and I think problems are a lot easier to track down now than they were before.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think 3 is probably a conservative estimate, right? I think it took like a full week last time. It took us literally a full day, not a work day, but a full day this time. So let's call that 5 times faster.
Awesome. Well, that's I'm sure going to be really helpful moving forward. Also, I did pull up in the background here the PR. One of the great things about the firmware SDK is that you can look at the code and we can talk about it freely here. But this is the PR that switched over to the Zephyr co-op library and has some of those stats that Sam was talking about in the body of the pull request there. So if folks want to check that out and take a peek for one example of conserving some of the RAM and ROM there, that's a pretty good representation. Oh, there was something else I was going to ask y'all, but then I pulled that up and now it's evading me.
Well, I can vamp for a minute on that. I think one thing that's also been really good about doing this stuff in the open is as soon as actually before that pull request merged, when that pull request was up, one of our customers went and looked at it and saw that we had that branch and then messaged us and told us, they're like, this is great. They're like, we are running out of RAM. We can use this RAM. This is exactly what we were looking for. And now I don't have to cut something else out of my device. So I've never worked on an open source project or that as my primary job before starting at Golioth. And it's been really cool to get that. Like, I mean, it's not even like immediate feedback. It's like predictive feedback because we hadn't even merged that change yet. It's pretty great.
Yeah, absolutely. The next thing the thing that came back to me while you were stalling for me there was any other changes that came out this week, either related to the firmware SDK or not. I know we had a few other things. Was there anything that y'all worked on this week other than the firmware SDK? I'm fairly certain that was the major focus for both of you for this week. Is that right?
Yeah, that's all that I worked on. What did you work on, Dan?
It was maybe a leading question. Well, I think one of the things that I think we can touch on because it is public is our pricing tiers adjusted a little bit, which is interesting to look at. So if you go and look at our pricing page today, and this is once again, a Friday afternoon stream exclusive for all you loyal listeners. But if you go and take a peek at them, and I'm attempting to share my screen, but moving very slowly, it looks very similar to before. But you'll just see some naming updates and maybe a little bit different supporting features, text, kind of that kind of thing, just to make things a little more clear. But in this first tier, we renamed it to individual, and then we have teams and enterprise. So kind of similar pricing models, but an update to the names. And I think we're going to keep refining those. But that was something that rolled out this week. So a bunch of our existing customers might have seen, a name change in their plan, and we obviously messaged out to those folks. But I think this is a lot cleaner. It feels like it kind of like explains what each tier is about, rather than having arbitrary names, I guess, or maybe not arbitrary, but that weren't applicable to everyone. These are very focused on the features that you get in each tier. So it's cool to see that roll out. And Dylan, who we just flashed his message up there on the screen, he had a major part or primary part in getting these defined. So that was another fun update that went out this week. Did y'all have any feelings about the the tiers? Any live feedback from y'all?
I'm really excited about it. I think one thing, I guess if we talked about the other changes to our pricing, it's something I can mention.
We haven't fully talked about them. We might save that for a future Friday afternoon exclusive.
Okay.
But folks can go look at the pricing tiers and maybe infer. So
yeah, I'll say in general, I think that the work we're doing on the business side to adjust our pricing is really exciting. I think it makes us a lot more competitive for a lot of our customers without, like sacrificing our own financials. But yeah, I think it'll be a big change that'll be good for us and good for our customers. And I guess I can also say, like, we've gotten good feedback on sort of the sales calls that we've done to validate and test this idea. So it's awesome to see it come to life.
LOL, Dylan. he can decide. So I guess we can talk about it. But yeah, I very much agree with you, Sam. And speaking of that, with any of things that we talk about here, you already mentioned getting that feedback before code was merged, talking to customers about our pricing and that sort of thing. If any folks watching this have feedback or feature requests or anything like that, we are extremely excited to receive it, and it helps us make things better. So definitely excited to get some on the pricing and other tier stuff. Yeah, I don't think that anything else that happened this week is something we can talk about here. Yeah, but
I can talk about my reaction to it, I think, which is Dan gave a really great demo today internally, which has got me really excited. And I don't often get like that excited for work. I'll be honest, it's just not my personality. But this stuff I think is really cool. I think it's like it fulfills a promise of Goliath, and I think it's going to be a real like game changer for what we're able to do in the future and what our customers are able to do. So while we can't tell you what it is,
we can tell them what it is. So Dan built a new service into Goliath and then queried it from a device in all of like 3.5 minutes on a live call. Like, it was incredible. And it's this underlying framework that we keep hinting around, but like the end goal of this is going to be like your head will spin.
And like on a personal level, I like having worked at previous companies where the firmware team, the product team will have this feature that we need, right? And it requires something from the backend team. And it can be so painful, one, to convince them that this is something that they need to work on because it's actually the product that we're selling and it's what we need. And then two, to wait then for them to build it, and then the chicken and the egg, and it's like seeing something like this come to life where not only are these things going to allow the cloud team to move much faster, but some of them, the simple ones, like I could just go in and do myself if my cloud team is dragging their feet.
Right. That never happens at Goliath, of course.
No, actually, it really doesn't happen at Goliath.
Yeah, so it's more like, all right, hold on, guys. Like, let's talk about this.
Yeah, anyway, Dan's a runner. You have to chase him.
Yeah.
Try to keep up.
Yeah, Dan and I were talking earlier today, and we were talking about something, and Dan goes, "Yeah, maybe I'll build that this afternoon."
Not hyperbole.
That
was a real conversation.
Yeah, that's actually what I've been doing for the past 2 hours, which is not what I was supposed to be doing. But I'm glad that there's shared excitement about where we're going. I think like one of the things that I kind of touched on in that demo is, I'm coming from a pretty different technical background, I think, from both of y'all, in that like the IoT space, or maybe I just say like connected devices space, is has been something that's newer for me, and it's been really exciting to see, like, you know, how the same kind of like first principles can apply to a lot of the things that we build, but also just the heterogeneity in like possible solutions really makes it critical that you don't have monolithic architecture. And especially early on too, right? Because you know we're a relatively small company depending on who you compare us to, and we just have like a limited set of information, right? We're working within just like this is maybe a good analogy. I'll tell Jonathan to put this in our pitch deck, but just like our customers deploy devices under lots of constraints, we build our product under quite a lot of constraints as well. And one of the biggest constraints is that we don't have the full knowledge of all the use cases that folks are going to have, and the spectrum that those use cases on are huge, which is a little bit scary anytime you're like building something new, because it's really hard to say like, I know for sure we don't need to do this, which are actually like critical. Being able to say for sure you don't need to do something is like the most critical thing to move an architecture forward. You know, it's like not worried about it, never a use case, and it's very rare that we're able to say that. So yeah, I'm also excited about having a modular system that allows us to do things quickly and also experiment, because you know, we have a lot of folks that, because the runway is so long for deploying connected devices because of hardware and maybe some to your point there, Sam, like maybe some false dependencies that people have right now between like firmware and cloud. We're trying to eliminate some of those dependencies, so hopefully get shorter. But because of the presently really long runways for delivering stuff, we have a lot of conversations about things that may or may not happen a year from now, you know, and we're early stage, so we need shorter time horizons. So yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun, both on the device and cloud side.
Yeah, I think another thing that's an interesting challenge for Goliath is that when I think about like technology in general, right? When you to make things more flexible, you're often sacrificing a little bit of performance, right? Like Python's a very flexible language. It's easy to basically do anything in it, right? But it's super slow and inefficient, right? Or you know, like even on the other side of that technology spectrum, right? Like using a general purpose CPU has a lot of advantages, but it's always slower than writing, you know, your logic into hardware circuits, right? With an FPGA or even like an ASIC. And I think one of the challenges for Goliath is we have all of these use cases and all of these customers we need to serve. But the one thing they have in common is that they need it to be as efficient as possible. So we need to make our product as generic as possible while sacrificing as little efficiency as possible. And so, yeah, I think it is a big challenge, but I mean, it's a fun challenge to work on.
Yeah, I really like that description. Maybe like a corollary to that, or this is something you mentioned earlier, is like it's pretty much always true that you want to do more in the cloud than you do on the device, right? Like you want to use the big powerful computers to do more complex and complicated things than you want to do with the small ones that are running on batteries. And I think that's something that's been a useful architectural principle as well when talking about like maybe that project that I've been spending the last 2 hours on is kind of related to that. So, but yeah, lots of ways to improve efficiency there.
For sure.
Well, cool. Well, unless if y'all have other work things, what are y'all up to this weekend? Do anything fun?
So it's funny. Today I'm reaching out to all my friends because this week I've just been so consumed with the release that I haven't talked to anyone, and I didn't make any plans at all.
That sounds like me. Well, maybe not the release part, but in terms of not having any plans and not talking to anyone, that just sounds like a standard week for me. But we don't all live in New York City, and we're not all as cool as Sam. So, but
okay. So I'll tell you. Nothing's locked down yet, but I'll tell you what's on my what's on the menu. What the options are.
Right.
So
I'm
there's
excited. I live vicariously through you, so
There's a concert venue, like a little club, that I like, that's doing a battle of the bands tournament basically through the month of February. So round one is this weekend. I actually messed up some of my scheduling because the band that I really want to see is competing tonight, but I have other plans tonight, so hopefully they make it to round two. There's also this like little indie movie theater near me called the Film Forum, which is doing what they call Sappho-Rama, which is a film festival, or a film series basically looking at like 30 or 40 different films featuring the lesbian experience, so Sappho,
Yeah.
over the last like 100 years, which is wild to me. So we have these like silent film. Literally, one of the films is from 1922.
Really?
Yeah, I really want to see it. I can't. Oh, it's starts with an F. I can't remember the name right now. Anyway, so like that's happening, and it looks really interesting. All the way up to like more recent movies. They have one from, I think this one's hilarious. They have a movie from 1999 called "But I'm a Cheerleader," which is about this girl who gets sent basically to like a conversion camp, or conversion therapy camp. So it's a comedy. It's lighthearted. Anyway, it's got a message for sure. But my favorite part about it is that one of the counselors at the camp is played by RuPaul, who plays an ex-gay man. And the idea of RuPaul pretending to be straight, I think it's just hilarious.
That does sound like a good lineup of weekend plans. That's what I feel like.
Someone who said they have no plans, that's pretty impressive, Sam.
Yeah.
Well, there's just options. I mean, maybe I don't know what I'm doing yet.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Mike?
My wife's playing opera tonight and Sunday, so not big plans on those days. So I'm sure we'll figure out something to do on Saturday. We made a big Costco trip last Saturday, so exciting stuff at the Stitch household. But I ordered the Bus Pirate 5 like as soon as the news hit.
Man.
And it's on the slow boat from China, I'm sure, but like every day the mail carrier comes around and I'm like, please be my Bus Pirate, because I bought this LED matrix pink molded plastic purse off of Amazon like 3 years ago for $9. And I want to sniff the signals from that and then maybe drive it with that RISC-V, the CH32V003 microcontroller, because I also have some of those that I never did anything with. So maybe some projecting in my future.
That's awesome. Like, does your Costco sell liquor?
Yes.
So did you, do you ever get like those like Kirkland brand like 20-year-old scotches or anything?
I didn't get that. So first of all, this Kirkland brand tequila is not bad. It's not like I usually like Hornitos, but really, if it's 100% agave, it's fine. I did try the Whistle Pig because I couldn't find Whistle Pig anywhere, and then they had it there, like 6-year Whistle Pig.
Oh wow!
And it was just okay. Like I like a spicier rye. That's like I don't like Scotch, so I don't like peatiness, and that Whistle Pig 6-year, it's got some peatiness in it. I mean, I drank it all. Don't get me wrong. But I think you were aghast because like I made some Manhattans with it, and you're like, no.
It's definitely a sipper. Yeah, that's for sure. I when I once so I used to work for a company that had an office in Seoul, and when I went to visit the office for the first time, I was like, oh, let me like bring something that it's a little like personal gift for me, but also maybe something that they it's like quintessentially American. So I brought like a really nice bottle of American whiskey. But like, and I don't mean anything disparaging by this, but like the drinking culture in Seoul does not lend itself to like a nice sipping whiskey, right? So we had this like gathering. It was like after hours, and we're all sitting around. We're playing a drinking game where you have to just like pour stuff into a cup, and then the person who loses has to drink the cup, right? And someone grabs this bottle of whiskey. I had to like lean across the table, and I was like, please do not pour this nice bottle of whiskey into that cup full of beer and soju and Coca-Cola.
Oh no. I'm
a
big. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sam.
So you should try the scotch that they have there because it's the same thing. It's like it's really cheap. The Kirkland scotch. It's really cheap. And it's pretty good, and it's not too peaty. Well, they might have a couple different kinds, but if you avoid like the Islay, it's a pretty good deal. The Kirkland scotch.
Okay. Well, I should try that because there's some cocktails that have like a Lafro float on them, and I'm like, I'm never gonna have that to make the float, and maybe I can try some of those cocktails with it in addition to just sipping it.
There you go.
I'm a big not for liquor, but for other things, a big Kirkland signature fan. So I do have one of our friends here is they just had a birthday recently, and they did their partner did a like trivia game show. Like that's what we did at the party about this person, which was super fun. It was like Jeopardy style, and one of the questions was how many articles of not just like Kirkland signature brand, but like has the Kirkland signature logo on it clothing items does he own. So
Wow.
it's yeah, I'm not quite to that level, but I am a big fan for sure.
I
I
wonder
had
if
never been there, but we lived with a diabetic cat for like 7 years, and like insulin is expensive, yo. So like I was ordering it mail order from Canada and stuff, and the vet was like, "Why do you order it from Canada?" I'm like, "Because it's so expensive here." And he's like, "Have you gone to Costco? Because it's like a quarter of the price of ordering it from Canada, and that's like a tenth of the price of getting it domestically." So
I shouldn't be surprised at all by that because you can literally like get married at Costco, but the fact that you can buy insulin there is pretty wild.
oh yeah, they have a full pharmacy there.
Wow.
What a
yeah.
good commercial we got going on. This is great.
Yeah, that actually reminds me. So I love this podcast called the Acquired Podcast. They basically do it's like 3.5 hour long episodes where they do like deep dives on companies. Their most recent one was on Novo Nordisk, which is I guess yeah.
What?
Also, for the listeners, I didn't know this at all. They're like one of the insulin companies, but now they've been big for like the GLP-1. Is that I think that's the right thing, but it's like
Wegovy, the obesity drug.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They have like a very fascinating history because they are a Danish company that and just companies work very differently there than here. So it's a really interesting breakdown of that. But they also talk about like a lot about the I guess you wouldn't call it invention, but discovery of like insulin manufacturing and like how they discovered. I think it's in the liver of like pigs and cows that they extracted it from. It was like so fascinating. And then they talked about how they were eventually able to, do it up to the way they do it now, which is not just like harvesting a bunch of pig and cow livers. So would highly recommend if folks are interested in how insulin works, which I didn't have that much knowledge of.
I recently learned that Novo Nordisk is the largest company in Europe, and this probably just shows how American I am because I've always just kind of wondered like what businesses are in Europe, like it's a wealthy economy, but like from what?
Yeah, I mean like I feel like that's fair that you didn't know that Novo Nordisk is like the biggest in Europe because I didn't even know they existed until I listened to this. But yeah, it is really interesting because they've there's lots of interesting companies in Europe, so a number of the episodes are on it, and like LVMH, which like owns a bunch of like the designer brands and stuff. They're like I believe one of the biggest ones, which is like very foreign to me because like
it's probably not the word you were looking for.
Yeah,
or maybe it was.
Yeah, it's very unfamiliar to me. Is the because like I don't know, I don't really know anyone who purchases luxury goods because I don't know.
The three of us just had that Costco conversation.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, people are not surprised. The listeners are not surprised.
I know a lot of people who have bought Louis Vuitton handbags from the side of the street. So Canal Street in New York is where you go to get your $30 Louis Vuitton handbags.
Yeah, that I mean, I don't see why you would if that was important to you, I don't see why you wouldn't just go that route because I don't think it's that easy to distinguish. But I guess the point of luxury goods is like how you feel owning it anyway. So
Yeah, the point is that you can tell people how much money you spent on it. Yeah.
right.
I mean, maybe like I got to play devil's advocate on this one because I do think that a lot of luxury goods are manufactured to a different standard than
Oh,
the
for sure, yeah.
lookalikes, and so
Yeah,
I don't value that a lot of the time, but some people do.
Yeah,
but someone should, right?
Well, if you want to talk about it, actually, I know a couple people I could get them on as guests if we just want to like change what the subject of this podcast is or this live stream. Yeah, I do think you're right though, Mike. Like the ones on Canal Street, I'm pretty sure come from a completely different factory in their faith. But I have a couple of friends who will like travel to Vietnam, and whenever they're there, they're like, oh well, like I know the Loewe factory is in Vietnam, so if I go to this town, I know I can get the stuff that fell off the truck, and it's literally exactly the same, but it's like 100 times cheaper.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Well, I'm disappointed that y'all are not having big watch parties this weekend for the sporting event of the year.
I don't think that's this weekend.
Oh, yes, it is. The U.S. Olympic Marathon Trials are on Saturday at 10 a.m.
Oh,
so you do have to subscribe to Peacock to watch them. I am actually going to pay Peacock $7 so that I can watch 2 hours of television. But
you missed the Black Friday $20 for a year Peacock deal. Come on.
Let me tell you, I am not a person who buys anything on Black Friday. So.
Well, you got to stick with me.
Yeah,
I'll get you all the good stuff.
All right. Well, I will expect in Slack after this call that I have a password and username waiting for me. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it is going to be a very exciting race, especially on the women's side. So, if y'all don't have anything going on.
You were talking about like all the records were broken, and then you were saying part of it was shoe technology is cray right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, in fairness, that discussion was much more global focused. America is not the best at the marathon, let's say. So like yeah, but there are the American women's record has been broken twice since the last trials. The men, on the other hand, have not even gotten like I won't go through the whole scoring or the qualifying mechanism because it is really the most complicated thing I have ever experienced. But you basically can qualify up to 3 people in the marathon, but it's not necessarily the people who run the fastest. It can be like the spots can be unlocked by people who then don't make the team, which is kind of ridiculous. But the U.S. men haven't even unlocked all 3 spots. So we're only going to, well, barring some pretty pretty surprising things, we'll probably only even get to send 2 U.S. men. So, and like the fastest one ran 2:07 something, and the world record got set this year for men at 2 hours and 35 seconds, I think. So we're
I just have to ask here, like,
yeah,
what are you looking for? Like, do you watch the full 2 hours, and what are you watching for? Like, what is the exciting part of a 2-hour marathon?
Yeah, so this marathon is a pretty different watching experience than most other ones because most of this marathon, or like the Olympics in Paris this summer, they're not going to set world records at any of these. One, because like, first of all, you never start a marathon at 10 a.m. That's like super late in the day to start a marathon. And they're running it in Orlando. So like, there's just bad conditions. It's going to be hot and it's going to be a mess. But because of like TV, that this always happens. But the other thing is, you only care about placing, which is totally different than almost every other marathon where you're very focused on your specific time and you have a race plan for your specific time. So for something like the trials or the Olympics, it actually is really interesting to watch it the full time because there's a lot more strategy in it, like an adaptation to what other people are doing. So like there's the 2 people who have qualified for the marathon already, or who unlocked the spots for the US, they need to come in the top 3 to be able to go and take those spots. But there's a pretty good chance that someone is just going to try to like come out of the gate super fast and, try. And let's say a pack of like 3 or 4 people come out of the gate super fast. They're likely going to fall off, right? They're not as fast as these other 2 guys who have run it, but maybe they won't, and if not, they need to like be close enough within striking distance, with also like they can't push themselves too hard so that they burn out. And so there's a pretty good amount to watch along the way. But I also think that I am extremely biased here. So don't go spend your money on Peacock. Ease into the sport.
You should, because Peacock is the channel of the non-traditional American sports. So like we watched the Tour de France and the Vuelta a España, and they were fantastic bike races. They've got non-American football. They've got European football on there, which is actually the American teams and stuff. So like,
that's very good.
We're not just about Costco here. We're also about Peacock.
Yeah.
I do love their Olympic coverage. That's about the only time I watch Peacock, but actually I shouldn't say that. I do love watching the Olympics. I do have some problems with Peacock, which is that it's like the last Winter Olympics. I mostly watch the Winter Olympics. I forget where the last ones were, but anyway, they're always, they're not usually in the US, so the times are different, which is fine. I like watching the full event, right? And not knowing who won. But Peacock, whenever you open the app, always opens up to the headlines. So if I'm like really interested in seeing, like US versus Canada curling, in the gold medal game or whatever, and I'm like, oh, that was at 1 a.m. I'll watch it the next day. Yeah, I open it up and it's like Canada wins gold. And I'm like, well, great. Now I have nothing to watch. Yeah. And they're only depriving themselves of ad revenue, because like I'm not going to watch a whole game when I know how it ends, So.
Yeah. My first qualm with Peacock is that they named it Peacock. That's just ridiculous. But
well, it's I mean,
that's I understand. I understand. I just think it's just a what does that have to do with stream? I don't know.
What does Hulu have to do with streaming? Like, is that a
Greek
god of television over the airwaves?
See, let me tell you, Netflix. I know exactly what Netflix does. They network the flicks,
They didn't used to actually subscribe to them when it was snail mail.
Yeah, right.
Snail mail movies. So
Netflix.
They just got lucky.
Yeah. And then, Max is just a whole nother level. I don't even know. They're just lost. Apple TV, that's a great name. That's a great name for a streaming service.
Yeah. Max is it has nothing really to do with streaming. I like that it's one syllable and doesn't make me uncomfortable to say. So that's an advantage over Peacock. But actually Max is probably my favorite streaming right now. I feel like I'm watching a lot of HBO.
Can you give us some recs?
So I recently watched Our Flag Means Death, which have you guys seen this?
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, so it's Taika Waititi.
Oh, I love Taika Waititi.
Yeah, he's so funny. He's so great. So it follows. He plays Blackbeard. And it doesn't. So he's a major character, but it's really about this guy. Was it Steed something? Anyway, the gentleman pirate, who is this like aristocrat from Barbados or something. A British guy living in Barbados.
Yeah.
Who in the golden age of piracy decides he's just going to buy a ship and become a pirate because he's bored and wants to do that. And he's innovative, so he pays his crew a salary instead of just like giving them a share of the plunder. So they have a regular salary, and he goes out there, he bumbles around, and eventually he finds Blackbeard. Blackbeard rescues him, and then they become lovers, and it's just a ridiculous show.
Oh, I have to watch this. This sounds amazing.
Yeah. You should. It's very well done. And the best thing about it is whenever something happens, like go Google it. Because pretty much everything that happens in the show, at least in the first season, happened in real life. And there's no evidence, there's no like hard evidence that Blackbeard and this guy, Steve, whatever his name is, were ever like actually lovers. There's no evidence of that. But he did let him hang around for a while. He did like rescue him a bunch of times when he didn't have to. He didn't like steal all his money. And basically the only plausible
That's the
explanation.
definition of love.
Well, like
No,
Blackbeard, Blackbeard normally, right? Like, why did he just kill this guy and take his ship and take his money, right?
Right.
Like, the only like plausible explanation of why Blackbeard kept this guy around is that they were lovers.
I mean, far be it from me to question it. Did y'all watch Next Goal Wins?
No.
Okay, so I'm a big Taika Waititi fan, and we frequently will like go to a friend's house and watch a movie on Friday nights, and that was one of our candidates last time. But the reviews were so bad that we ended up watching this movie called After Sun instead, which was very intense. But anyway, I was disappointed. I was surprised to see a movie that he made get such bad reviews. So,
well, if we're doing good things to recommend, What We Do in the Shadows, it's an FX show on Hulu, and it is incredibly great. It is like Parks and Rec if all of the crew were vampires living in Staten Island, but it's told in like a similar way. And like they're just, those actors are so deadpan that they sell you on being these like 400-year-old buffoons who don't get what living in the modern world is like. But it's also very heartwarming message about interpersonal relationships. So
and it's also a Taika Waititi project.
Oh yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah. All right. Well,
wow.
We have those three things, right?
Yeah.
Costco.
We're building them up. Have y'all seen Hunt for the Wilder People?
No.
Never heard of it. No.
Oh, it's another Taika Waititi movie. You got to go watch it. It is extremely heartwarming.
Well, as long as we're on the Taika Waititi, you all see Jojo Rabbit, right?
Yes, I loved it. Yeah.
Excellent. And of course, Thor. Great Taika Waititi movie.
Get out. Sam, you're not allowed to come on this stream anymore. That was the last straw.
You got to make money too, okay? Come on.
Yeah,
the movie's whatever, but the rock golem guy that he plays is my favorite character in all of Marvel.
Looks like Hunt for the Wilder People's on Netflix, which we don't have right now, but we will soon.
Nice. I need to. So at some point, we're gonna have to get your streaming. I'm intrigued by just the little bits I've heard about y'all's streaming subscription habits in the Stitch household. Because it seems like there's some rotation going on.
Oh yeah, we don't subscribe to them all at once. Yeah,
I guess that's a very good strategy. Except for I assume that they have discounts for like annual, but I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, I think that. So for instance, one time I went over to my friend's house and he had a hacked Nintendo Wii. This was back when Nintendo Wii was the thing. And we had a Nintendo Wii, right? And so he's like, what game should we play? And he's got like 300 games on there. And then we go to play it and I'm like, well, what button does this? What button does that? And he's like, I don't know. I haven't played this one before, because he assigns no value to any of those games because he has all of them. Where I had 6 games, each of which I had purchased. And so I assigned a value to them. So I think you will possibly enjoy your entertainment more if you limit the available things.
Wow. I feel like that's the best wisdom I've been imparted in quite some time, honestly. I liked how I was wondering where we were going with the Wii, honestly, when you started. And then you hit me with the lesson and I thought, that was my reaction.
Economy. That's what that lesson is. Economy.
Also, the correct answer to what are we going to play on the Wii is let's get out the GameCube controllers and play a GameCube game on the Wii. That's the only correct answer.
Wow.
Let's play Mario Kart, or I'm going back home is the response you should have had. Or Super Smash Bros. Of course. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, I was gonna say those are pretty much the games I would play, but also not with the Wii, not like driving it, right? Like with the controllers, because
you go to someone's house, they pull out the Wii wheel, and you say, you know what? there's other
right.
people, and we'll probably have fun with other people. So I'm not coming over here anymore. We
I
obviously
remember that
don't
there
have
was like a
aligned
plastic
values.
wheel that you could put the thing in, and I think there was like a plastic tennis racket that you could put it into.
Yeah, it was all
wow.
terrible. It was all awful.
My favorite part about that is that like 6 months after the Wii came out, they came out with that giant rubber case for the controller.
Everyone's throwing it through their TV. Yeah.
Hitting their little brother in the head. Yeah.
Oh man, it's a good thing. I am gonna wrap it up here because in theory, Jonathan might be watching and wonder why he pays us any money. Well, he pays us for this content. I mean, we should put this content on Netflix and we can get a piece of the pie. But I was just thinking it's really great that we don't have to name these episodes. They're always just called Friday Afternoon Stream, because I really don't know what I would call this one at this point. I guess we'd call it Firmware SDK Release, Kirkland Signature,
and Shenanigans.
Well, no. There was two more. Peacock and Taika Waititi.
So I think I don't know. I always love this podcast and they just pick out like one quote completely out of context and use it for. So I wasn't like paying attention and writing things down, but that's what I think I would love to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I don't know, like Mike's quote about limiting your entertainment options. That could be a good title.
Right. Just not at all about what the show, not at all descriptive of what the show is about, but it did happen. So
I mean, I'm pretty sure we spent longer talking about Taika Waititi than we did about the Firmware SDK. So it really is what the show is about.
As we should have. As we should have.
As we should have. Yeah.
All right. Well,
yeah. To be clear, I'm not upset about it. I'm just saying if we're going to be accurate with the title.
The Golioth team, the Golioth engineering discusses Taika Waititi. It's going up on socials after this. All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up. But Sam, thanks for joining this week, and I'm sure we'll have you back plenty more times. And I hope you all both have a great weekend.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
All right. See you, folks.